In this week's discussion, the following question arose. Why does human nature seem hardwired to believe lies? What accounts for this prevalent human tendency, and is it ingrained in human nature itself? These important questions have vital connections with many of the major themes for this class. In fact, they touch on the very values and commitments that are central to philosophy itself. In approaching these questions, we should recognize that the way we explain the cause of deception will depend upon the kind of deception in question. Imagine a situation where the deceiver is another person. In such cases, the deception often occurs because the deceiver is especially charming, charismatic, or rhetorically gifted. Or maybe because the deceiver is taking advantage of our trust and confidence. We are all familiar with situations of this sort, and we understand how people find themselves believing the lies of the manipulative, unscrupulous, and deceitful. However, there is another sort of deception which upon reflection really should appear quite puzzling, a type of deception for which we do not really have a ready explanation. And here I am referring to self-deception. Let's consider a classic example. Imagine that a woman suspects her husband of cheating, and imagine also that she has amassed a substantial amount of circumstantial evidence to this effect. Suppose even that her friend has testified to seeing her husband with another woman. Despite this, she still may not be able to bring herself to recognize the truth. This would be a case of self-deception. After all, the reason she cannot face the truth isn't really because she believes her husband's lies. She has more than enough evidence of his infidelity. Instead, whatever deception she has succumbed to must have been foisted on herself by herself. Still, while self-deception seems to be the best explanation of this case, self-deception itself can also seem inexplicable, if not even impossible. Deception involves a deceiver and the deceived. The deceived does not know the truth, and this is precisely what allows the deceiver to carry out the deception. Yet, in cases of self-deception, the deceiver and the deceived are the same person. The woman in our example, as the deceiver, would have to know that her husband is cheating, but also as the deceived would have to, in some sense, not know that her husband is cheating. Now, there has been much philosophical discussion about how self-deception could be possible. What matters for our purposes, however, is that if self-deception is possible, then it would seem that the tendency to believe lies must really be deeply ingrained in human nature. So deeply ingrained, in fact, that we can be tempted to believe things that we ourselves know are false. Furthermore, the possibility, even prevalence, of self-deception sits rather uncomfortably with one distinctively philosophical view of human nature. In fact, it may even sit uncomfortably with the practice of philosophy itself. For example, in his work on metaphysics, Aristotle makes the famous claim that all men by nature desire to know. Humans naturally pursue knowledge and desire the discovery of truth. As evidence of this, Aristotle points out that we take delight in our senses, especially our sense of sight, not only because the information our senses give us is practically useful, but because we love our senses for themselves. Even when we do not plan on doing anything at all, we still value what we perceive through vision. And this is precisely because this sense makes us know. It is no accident that a philosopher like Aristotle believes truth-seeking is fundamental to human nature. The commitment to seeking the truth is the primary value of philosophy. As we will see in this class, this commitment is shared by Aristotle's fellow ancient Greek philosophers, Socrates and Plato. Socrates' commitment to the pursuit of truth was so strong that he was willing to die for it. He was willing to make himself a martyr for philosophy. And Plato, who was Socrates' student, believed that our pursuit of truth in this life could only be fulfilled after death. So our purpose in this life is to prepare ourselves for death through the practice of philosophy. If we return to Aristotle's comments in the Metaphysics, we can see why philosophy is so tightly connected with the pursuit of truth. Aristotle famously states that it is owing to their wonder that men begin to philosophize. Philosophers contemplate deep questions about great matters, such as the question of the origin of the universe, and they do so simply to escape from ignorance, and not primarily for any practical or utilitarian end. The philosophical ethos, therefore, is one that loves truth and abhors ignorance. Consequently, if philosophy is a fundamentally human activity, then shouldn't we expect that the desire to know will be a deep part of our human nature? But of course, this returns us to our original question. If humans really do desire to know, then why do we so easily deceive ourselves? How can we find ourselves so readily believing what we know to be false? What other human needs and desires compete with the high-minded philosophical love of truth? One answer is simple pleasure. It just feels good to believe certain things, while believing other things is unpleasant. It can feel good to suspend one's disbelief while witnessing a magic trick, to get lost in the moment and indulge our sense of wonder. It can also feel good to believe that those who are good and virtuous will live happily, and that those who are vicious and evil must be miserable, whatever evidence there may be to the contrary. Our beliefs also play an important role in maintaining our sense of comfort and stability. Our beliefs are not isolated things, they form a worldview. They each form part of how we look at the world from a moral, political, religious, and social perspective. This is why debates about issues like abortion, war, immigration, and the death penalty are often so contentious. Nobody enjoys the discomfort of having their worldview questioned. Truth is a fine thing, but if we are honest with ourselves, we might find that we often prefer comfort. We might find that we prefer the stability and consistency that comes from not having to change our mind. This is why we will always be tempted to deceive ourselves into thinking that we have stronger evidence for the truth of our worldview than we actually possess, into thinking that our core moral, political, and religious commitments are unassailable and beyond doubt. Finally, we shouldn't discount the role that beliefs play in human connection and community. Beliefs and creeds bind together friends, families, nations, religions, workplaces, and political parties. When participating in some community requires adherence to some specific set of beliefs, then it is easy to see how the desire to know may take a back seat to faithfully abiding by the group's principles. And the kind of connection which beliefs enable is not only interpersonal, it is intrapersonal as well. Imagine someone thoroughly committed to the dogmas of a religion or political party. Suppose that over time this person began to question and eventually reject those beliefs. One consequence could be a crisis of identity. How could she explain how a set of beliefs she once took to be so central and to be unassailable, how could she explain how she now sees those as false? How could she avoid feeling alienated from her past self? How could she preserve a coherent sense of self, a coherent sense of who she is as a person? This need to understand ourselves coherently and preserve our identity can, therefore, also conflict with our desire to know. So, the desire to know inevitably competes with many other natural human desires. If we rigorously pursue the truth, we may risk our personal happiness, comfort, stability, sense of community, and even our sense of self. And all of this should make us wonder, is the life of philosophy worth the risk? And what should we make of the human desire to know?